en lo que sucedió el día en el que un equipo de contrainteligencia del FBI allanó su residencia en enero de 2019. Empezaremos con Nidia Stone.
¿Quién era Nidia Bertrán? La niña, la joven, ¿quién era?
Una niñita que se creció en Washington, D.C., antes de cuando todavía había mucha discriminación en Washington. Pero era difícil porque yo cuando empecé colegio no entendía inglés. Pero mi mamá, mis padres decían, tú vas a aprender inglés cuando salgas a la calle para jugar con los niños. Y tú vas a hablar español en la casa.
Me hablas de amor y yo quiero saber del amor por la fotografía.
Y eso yo lo aprendí de mi padre, porque mi papá era un amateur photographer. Y yo aprendí cómo hacer eso mirándolo a él. Y eso es que cuando yo empecé a estudiar photography, yo lo hice porque era algo que me venía natural y estaba muy interesado en eso. Y cuando yo empecé a tomar fotos, todavía era negativos, con químicos y todo.
El cuarto oscuro, con
Sí,
el foco
el
rojo,
cuarto oscuro.
todo, ¿no? ¿Cómo es que la fotografía y la política se encuentran?
Yo estaba trabajando, estaba yendo al colegio, tomando cursos de photography con otras muchachas. Y nosotros empezamos un negocio de tomar fotos. No sabíamos dónde empezar, pero nos estaban recomendando para trabajo. En eso, como 2 años después que estábamos empezando, fuimos a tomar fotos a una boda. Y en esa boda me conocí el best man, que estaba casada con una señora que trabajaba para Roger. Y él le estaba hablando a ella y ella dice, tú sabes, a mí me encanta como ustedes trabajan juntas. Y dice, yo quiero que vaya a conocer a Roger Stone, que él es el East Regional Campaign Director para Ronald Reagan, y porque tenemos una convención que viene y él tiene que dar, tú sabes, el OK. Y yo fui y presenté a lo que íbamos a hacer, le enseñé fotos del trabajo como lo hacíamos y me llamaron y nosotros cogimos ese trabajo. Y de ese trabajo que hicimos allí, que fue CPAC, tú sabes qué grande es el CPAC.
Sí, lo sé.
Sí, y ella y yo hicimos un darkroom en el cuarto, en el hotel donde estaban haciendo la convención. Tomábamos fotos todo el día y toda la noche imprimiendo. Y hicimos un trabajo fenómeno, porque de ese trabajo que hicimos, cogimos como 8 o 9 clientes, dijeron, wow, we like the way you work. Y estábamos produciendo prints for a press release y estábamos tan excited porque de eso vino un negocio buenísimo y nosotros llegamos al punto que teníamos como 28 photographers y nosotros hacíamos the President's Dinner todos los años en el Convention Center y yo cogí un sistema para poder identificar todo el mundo en las mesas y todo el mundo tomó esa foto. Entonces ella y yo tuvimos turno. Una vez ella fue a coger el presidente y el otro vez yo cojo el vicepresidente y hacíamos los private holding rooms para hacer las fotos con ellos. Y también ellos les gustaron mucho lo que nosotros estábamos haciendo y durante la presidencia de Ronald Reagan ellos empezaron a llamarnos a nosotros porque todas las recepciones que tenían en la Casa Blanca no podían tener los photographers desde el White House trabajando. Y tú sabes, conocimos a Anwar Sadat y un montón de gente y no había ninguna seguridad así como hay ahora. Yo he estado sentado en la silla del presidente con mis pies en el desk de él.
Que pocos tienen ese privilegio, ¿no?
Military experience has helped me in the practice of law in many ways. I mean, the discipline that you learn in the military at such a young age is something that you take on with you for the rest of your life. And the amount of responsibility, that you have a responsibility for others, that you work as a team, which is our culture here at Dream Team Law. I learned that from the Navy. There's no man left behind. We work the same way here at Dream Team. I fought for my country, and now I'll fight for you.
En la segunda parte de esta entrevista exclusiva con Roger Stone y su esposa, Nidia describe la intrusión del FBI en la vida privada de la pareja y la forma en la que los agentes federales los intimidaron y se adentraron hasta en lo más profundo de su vida personal.
Cuéntame de esa noche en la que el FBI llegó a tu casa y hizo una redada. ¿Qué pasó?
¿Qué pasó? Para ver lo que era, y bajé y vi los soldados ahí con los armamentos de ellos. Habían 4. Y yo estaba, ¿qué es esto? Para mí era como un Fellini movie. Yo dije, esto es loco, es que no me lo veía y no lo creía lo que era.
¿No dieron explicación? Pero,
No.
sí, pero lo sacaron de una manera abrupta a la
ninguna
casa.
explicación. Nadie me habló ni una palabra. Fuimos, me llevaron para afuera, no me pusieron handcuffs ni nada, pero fui hasta el fin del driveway. Ahí vi a Roger. Roger tenía eso así detrás. Y yo tenía mi teléfono y sonó y era el abogado de nosotros. Y él me dijo, no digas nada, no le hables a nadie. Y dije, ok.
El saber que estos agentes estaban metiéndose hasta lo más íntimo de tuyo, de Roger, ¿qué significó eso para ti?
Bueno, en el principio yo no sabía qué es lo que ellos querían. Yo creo más que creía que iba a estar registrando las cosas de Roger. Habían 2. Una de las abogadas que estaba en el trial y otros estaban allí haciéndome preguntas. La primera cosa que me preguntaron, y la única pregunta, porque después de eso yo no le contesté nada, querían saber el contratiempo del password del computer y el teléfono. Yo me puse a reír. Yo le dije, ¿tú le has dado eso a tu esposa? Porque yo no creo. Yo no lo tengo. Tú sabes más de Roger Stone que yo. Y ya yo no le hablé, yo dije, nosotros no tenemos nada más de qué hablar. Pero en algún tiempo, después de como 2 o 3 horas, ya yo estaba, porque yo estaba vestida en las mismas ropas que yo estaba durmiendo. Y había un montón estaban en la casa entera y yo no sabía cuánto tiempo iban a estar allí. Pedí que me dejara cambiar la ropa. Entonces me asignaron una agent para mí, y ella subió conmigo, y ella estaba toda vestida como un catsuit negro, con el revólver aquí, y me llevó para arriba, y dice, yo tengo que entrar, él tuvo que entrar en el baño conmigo, y le pedí, por favor, vírate, tengo que ir al baño.
Esa es una violación tremenda, la intimidad de una persona.
Hasta en el baño. Entonces yo fui al baño y me dije, me tengo que cepillar los dientes ahora. Entonces abrí la gaveta, pero ella no sabía que yo iba a abrir la gaveta. Ella brincó como 15 pies, ¡pran! Así como una leona. Dije, esto no es un revólver, this is my electric toothbrush. Y ahí, pero entonces entré de ahí para vestirme en el closet, pero ellos estaban metidos en el closet. Mira.
O sea, ellos querían que se vistiera, se lavara los dientes, fuera al baño, enfrente de ellos.
Enfrente de ellos. Yo no podía dejar salir de la vista de ellos en ningún minuto por 13 horas. 13 horas.
¿Y cómo fue eso para usted?
Cuando yo subí arriba, y yo miré en el cuarto para ver lo que estaban haciendo, y tenían lo que estaban haciendo en como 3 o 4 diferentes lugares. Y en ese cuarto, además que eran las cosas mías, Roger, no había ni un t-shirt de Roger en ese cuarto. Ponían papel en el piso, brown paper, y cogieron cada gaveta y lo viraron. Y ellos le tomaron fotos a todo. Así, plan, tomaban fotos, así, plan, fotos. Eso le hicieron con todo mi ropa de interior, con todo.
¿Revisaron su ropa interior?
Sí, todo en el cuarto, todo. Eso para mí era tan intrusive. Yo nada más que me imagino cómo se había sentido Melania.
Me imagino.
Sí.
Hacia allá iba mi siguiente pregunta, porque tengo entendido que la misma gente que fue e hizo la redada en su casa, que se metió a su cajón de ropa interior, hizo lo mismo con el cajón de la ropa interior de la primera dama.
Sí. Sí, y es increíble que en este país que el gobierno puede entrar y hacer eso.
¿Y usted ha hablado con Melania Trump sobre eso?
No después de eso. Yo la conocí muy temprano en Roger, cuando en el año 2000, cuando él se apostoló para ser un candidate en el Independent Party. Yo era el photographer de él y Roger era el political consultant. Y eso es cuando nosotros la conocimos a ella.
Ahí empezó el romance.
Sí, sí, eso es donde empezó. Y ella era una modelo y él estaba tan enamorada de ella. Yo le pregunté un día, ¿y por qué ella es tan especial? Porque él siempre estaba, tú sabes, por ahí. Y él dice que ella me da una calma, porque ella es así. Es una cosa que ella tiene un centeredness, que ella no se pone como nerviosa ni nada. Ella lo tiene todo por adentro, pero ella es very centered. Y eso es lo que él le daba a él, como a sentir.
¿Qué es Roger Stone para usted?
Yo he conocido a Roger, me siento toda mi vida y de otras vidas. Es algo una conexión que yo tengo con él, que es beyond anything.
Va más allá de cualquier cosa.
Es una cosa que yo siempre, me siento que siempre lo he conocido y siempre lo voy a conocer. Y esta vida ha sido, no importa lo que ha pasado, it's been a wild ride.
¿Cuántos hijos de él o no de él, pero yo escuchaba una declaración que él decía que él se casó e instantáneamente se convirtió en hombre de familia?
Sí, mi hija y mi hijo, los dos cogieron el nombre de él, porque él nos estaba cuidando, estaba ahí para nosotros, como sus padres naturales nunca habían estado. Y él con los nietos y todo. Y yo tengo fotos de él que los nietos lo cogieron y les pintaron todas las uñas en diferentes colores.
Lo que hace un abuelo.
Sí.
Lo que permite una abuela, los nietos.
Sí. Pero él tuvo que ir a un meeting el próximo día y no se lo quitó. Tuvo que ir a un board meeting with purple, con las uñas moradas y verde y amarilla.
¿Se considera latina?
Bueno, yo no sabía que yo era latina hasta que yo puse mis pies en la Florida y vi todo a mi familia junta, porque yo venía y lo veía a cada tiempo, pero viviendo aquí, cuando venía mis primas, Dalia, Sadia, todo el mundo, Ginny, Rolando, y tuvimos muchas reuniones. Me dio un sentido de que había encontrado mi alma, conectando con latino, sintiendo ese calor de amor que uno siente. Porque en Washington y todo el mundo está usando otras personas.
Si me puede servir a mí de algo,
sí,
¿no?
A ver si it's worth their time. Sí.
Si vale la pena que invierta mi tiempo contigo, ¿no?
Mira, sí.
¿Cuáles son los valores latinos con los que Nidia se identifica?
Amor por familia, esa, ¿cómo se llama? Loyalty.
Lealtad.
Que uno tiene y que eso no se... Hasta hay gente en la familia que creen políticamente en diferentes maneras, pero hemos podido mantener esa relationship juntos.
¿Cómo es la mujer latina hoy vista desde la óptica de Nidia Stone? Una mujer que ha trabajado, que ha luchado por sus valores, por su familia, que ha pasado cosas muy difíciles al lado de su esposo. ¿Cómo ves tú a la mujer latina que hoy a lo mejor no acaba de darse cuenta de la importancia de mantener los valores de nosotros los latinos?
La raza latina es tan importante, tan emocional, tan centro de, y es una cosa que it envelops you. Es como alguien poniéndote una frazada.
Te envuelve.
Sí, sí. Y eso como yo me siento. Y nada más, además que de la familia, yo tengo muchas amigas latinas. Y es un amor y un que yo siento cuando yo las veo, aunque yo no las veo por mucho tiempo, porque por COVID yo he estado enferma. Yo no las vi y recientemente yo he estado saliendo a comer y visitando y es como no ha pasado un día cuando yo me junto con ella.
Vamos a traer nuestro próximo segmento a Roger. ¿Sí?
Okay.
Para platicar con él.
Okay.
Military experience has helped me in the practice of law in many ways. I mean, the discipline that you learn in the military at such a young age is something that you take on with you for the rest of your life. And the amount of responsibility, that you have a responsibility for others, that you work as a team, which is our culture here at Dream Team Law. I learned that from the Navy. There's no man left behind. We work the same way here at Dream Team Law. I fought for my country, and now I'll fight for you.
La última parte de esta entrevista exclusiva está dedicada a Roger Stone. Aquí usted escuchará de voz de él mismo tanto los procedimientos seguidos por el FBI, la presencia especial de CNN en la escena cuando el resto de la prensa estaba fuera del perímetro de acción y cómo el FBI defendió a este medio de comunicación para que se quedara en la zona en donde Roger y Nydia Stone eran esposados y detenidos.
Mr. Roger Stone.
Here we go.
So the two of you look great together, you know, and you have been together for almost, what, 30 years?
30
Something like
years.
that?
Yep.
Something like that. How did the love story begin?
Well, I was working for Governor Ronald Reagan in his third presidential campaign, and Nydia was hired as the photographer for the campaign. That's how we met, and we fell in love.
Love at first sight?
Pretty close.
Cool.
But we were both married, and we ultimately both got divorced and got together. For a long time, she would not see me. She wouldn't even entertain the idea, but I wore her down, and she saved my life.
Why? How did she save your life?
Well, I was pretty wild in my younger days.
Oh,
I was
okay.
a libertine. She calmed me down. I didn't even own a pair of blue jeans until I met my wife. I was 100% politics. I was 100% business. She got me to slow down and enjoy life.
But I drew the line, no jeans to the dry cleaners.
No jeans to the dry cleaner.
No, ever.
Well, those are better washing it at home than to
Yeah.
begin with. How did you start in politics? What drove you to politics?
Well, when I was 12 years old, the woman who lived next door to us gave me a copy of a book called Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater. Up until that time, I wanted to be an actor. I had a huge hat collection, and I lived in a rural area where there were no children of my age. Well, that means there's no football, no basketball, no baseball, no team sports, because there was nobody to play with. And therefore, I had to engage in activities that you can do by yourself. Reading, I read a huge amount of history and biography. Weightlifting, long distance running, but I really was interested in being an actor. Of course, my parents, I come from a blue collar background. Neither of my parents went to college. They're very hardworking people. I come from a Sicilian, Hungarian background. My parents were saying, no, son, be an electrician, be a plumber, be a drywall man. Those people make really great money, meaning be a tradesman. But I read this book and I was immediately transfixed. I knew I was a conservative. I knew that I loved a strong America with a small, inobtrusive government, low taxes, no wasteful spending, strong national defense. I knew from that moment that I wanted to be in politics.
So at a certain point in your life, young life, you decided to start in the political world. How did that change your life?
Well, I wrote a letter to former Vice President Richard Nixon in 1967, in which I told him that I thought he had been robbed of the presidency in 1960. Prior to that, I had been a Goldwater zealot. That's where my anti-communism comes from, something we have in common because Nidia's family, as you know, left Cuba and they're hardline anti-communists. After the Goldwater debacle, when you're 12 years old, you can't really understand that your candidate's going to get crushed. But I began to study Richard Nixon's election in 1960. I determined that the presidency had likely been stolen from him. I wrote a letter to him. He was in exile, practicing law in New York City. I told him if he ever wanted to run again, which I thought he should, that I wanted to be involved. Now, he didn't know at the time I was 14 years old. And 2 years later, I got a call from his office asking me whether I was still interested. I took the train into New York City, was interviewed in his law office. I think they were kind of shocked that I was as young as I was, but ultimately they gave me a job as a gopher, kind of an all-around office boy. And it was a very exciting time because I worked for John Mitchell, later the Attorney General of the United States, Nixon's campaign manager, would later go to prison, I think wrongly, in Watergate. But sitting outside his office, I saw the giants of the day go by. Reverend Billy Graham, Senator Everett Dirksen, Governor Nelson Rockefeller, Governor George Romney, Governor Ronald Reagan, and so on. So it's very exciting for somebody my age. Before we had cell phones, so I didn't get any selfies, but I did get a lot of autographs.
Yeah, of course, I can imagine. So you mentioned Ronald Reagan. Was him your turning point?
Well, yes. In college, I was involved in the college Republicans. Then I became involved in the Young Republicans. In 1977, I was elected national chairman of the Young Republicans. From that trajectory, I had been a Reagan supporter in 1976, had worked in his 76 campaign. Then I was hired in 1980 when he ran again to run the northeastern states for him. This is probably my proudest accomplishment. And then I worked on his re-election in 1984. So since the original Nixon campaign, I have been involved in 12 Republican national presidential campaigns and one campaign for a libertarian candidate for president because I could not, in good conscience, support Mitt Romney.
Well, I understand that view because I could not support him either. I would like to know about how do you see politics now? What we have now? How are we doing?
We're not doing very well. There was a time when there was a certain camaraderie among people who were in professional politics. Many, many friends of mine were Democrat professionals. And when I lived in Washington, we would eat together, we would drink together, we would tease each other. There was a certain, congeniality about it, and that's now completely gone. Today, unfortunately, I think this is largely on the other side. They don't just want to beat you in an election. They want to send you to prison and destroy your life. It was not always like that. There was, at one time, a civility in politics. That civility is completely gone.
Why is it gone?
Well, because I've come to the conclusion, despite the fact that I am a loyal Republican, I'm a Republican in the tradition of Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. The real struggle in our politics today is not between Republicans and Democrats. It's between a global elite who have a vision for the country that would erase our constitutional liberties, and then everybody else, the outsiders. So it's really the insiders versus the outsiders. And Donald Trump, a most improbable candidate for president, the first president of the United States who wasn't a governor, a senator, a congressman, or a general, comes out of nowhere. The political establishment doesn't take him seriously, and they also don't take his campaign philosophy, America First, seriously. And when he says, while he's running for president, I'm going to cancel the Iranian arms deal, and I'm going to withdraw us from the Paris Climate Accords. Why should we pay $365 million a year, and the Chinese, who are the biggest polluters on earth, they pay nothing? And I'm going to rebuild our military strength, and I'm going to appoint conservatives to the federal judiciary. This is very threatening to the New World Order. This is very threatening to the two-party duopoly who really are running the country in an alliance, with corporately owned media. So Trump is a threat to them then, an existential threat to business as usual. The 2016 election was all decided. It was going to be Hillary Clinton versus Jeb Bush, and nothing would really change. We'd still be engaged in endless foreign wars where our national interests are not clear. We'd still be experiencing the erosion of our civil liberties. We'd still be watching the atrophy of our military strength. We would be still going deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. We would still be paying taxes across the board, ever increasing taxes. And Donald Trump comes along and he reverses all of that. How many presidents said, I'm going to give you energy independence? No longer should we buy oil from the Middle East or from Russia or from China or from Venezuela. Every president promises that, but Donald Trump actually does it. So I think he is such a threat to this cozy little system, which is really based about control and money. It's about control, power, and money that our politics turned very, very nasty. That's why I was targeted by the special counsel, not because I did anything wrong. There is no Russian collusion for me to lie about. I was charged with lying to Congress about Russian collusion. We now know definitively on the basis of classified documents that there was no Russian collusion for me to lie about. So the real reason that I was charged was to put extraordinary pressure on me to testify falsely against Donald Trump, to use my testimony as an article of impeachment. They showed me a list of 26 cell phone calls between myself and candidate Trump in 2016. And they wanted me to testify falsely that these had involved the Russians or WikiLeaks and so on. In other words, they wanted me to lie. And I refused. And my lawyers, of course, being lawyers, said, well, maybe you shouldn't be so hasty. This could be your last chance. And I said, no. And she completely supported my decision. There was no way I could do that and look myself in the mirror.
How could you commit your name to a lie?
Well, Michael Cohen did it. Other people have done it. I mean, the prosecutors can put undue pressure on you. They were threatening to send me to prison for 7 to 9 years, a sentence completely out of whack with even the federal sentencing guidelines. But if you go read the sentencing recommendation, it says I was found guilty of assisting a foreign nation interfering in our elections, which I wasn't charged with, nor was I convicted of.
No, and at the end, it was proved that such a thing didn't happen, that it was exactly the other way around.
Exactly.
So, and they were trying to make Donald Trump and you in this case somehow involved in such a fraud, a scandal.
Yes, because from the moment Trump was elected, an operation went into place that involved the highest reaches of government in the Obama administration, and of course Hillary Clinton. So the use of the full authority of the United States government and the incredible capabilities of our intelligence agencies, using fabricated evidence, the Steele dossier and the CrowdStrikes report, which they knew to be fraudulent, as the rationale to remove Donald Trump through the Mueller investigation and through 2 impeachments, that's the biggest dirty trick in American political history.
Tell me about the raid that the FBI did to your house. And, your wife was describing all the things that you went through. You were there, you were handcuffed. How did you feel at that moment?
Well, I had some small advantage in that I really did believe they were coming in advance, because the night before the raid, I was contacted by Sarah Murray at CNN asking for my address. And I thought that was odd. She said she wanted to mail me something. Then I went online, I realized that there were multiple addresses listed for us because we had moved. But I knew this didn't smell right. So I told my wife, they're coming tomorrow morning to arrest me. And she said, you've been saying that every week for the last 10 weeks. I said, no, this time I'm pretty sure. So I set my alarm for 5 o'clock. I was actually awake when they arrived. I took a shower. I put on my Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t-shirt, because I understand product placement.
That's right.
By the way, you can get yours at rogerstonestore.com.
Good.
And I was sitting in an upstairs bedroom window where you had or bathroom window really, where you had a vantage point of the entire front yard. I had a Bible in my lap. I was reading a passage from the Bible, specifically where it says, I will not be shaken. When they arrived, they pounded on the door, and of course I answered the door. Again, it was kind of shocking because there had been a drumbeat of media stories insisting that my arrest and my charges against me were imminent. And my lawyers and I just couldn't figure out what I could be charged with, because there was no Russian collusion. I was not a link between WikiLeaks and the Trump campaign. I had received no emails and passed no emails on. Although I had made misstatements in a 6-hour testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, they're honest mistakes, meaning they didn't hide any underlying crime. They weren't material. They weren't relevant. They were technically incorrect, but under the False Statements Act, your statement must not only be false, but you have to have a motive. It has to be willful. You have to know you're lying, and it has to have a motive, which of course none of it did. So for example, did you receive an email from Steve Bannon on August 9th? I don't recall. Yes, you did. Here it is. Well, it was a link to a story in that morning's Washington Post. So what? What does that prove? It proves nothing whatsoever. Immaterial, you lied. This was very carefully
Orchestrated.
Well, I would say fabricated. In other words, I do think, because those on the left read Twitter voraciously, and they begin to believe everything that is said on Twitter is a fact. So I believe that Mueller's prosecutors believed that after they lied to 2 federal judges, claiming that they had probable cause to charge me with treason, conspiracy against the United States, counterfeiting, money laundering of millions of dollars, mail fraud, wire fraud, aiding and abetting a conspiracy before and after the fact, unauthorized access to a government computer. They had evidence of none of these things. They were able to access millions of emails and text messages, and guess what? There was no evidence of any of those crimes. They had 19 of my associates were dragged before the grand jury and browbeat. Where is he hiding it? Where is he hiding it? There was nothing to hide, but they refused to accept that. So then they had to fabricate this lying to Congress charge, when in fact I did make misstatements, but they didn't rise to the level of a prosecution because they didn't hide any Russian collusion. When I was sentenced, the judge said, "You were convicted of lying to cover up for Donald Trump." No, I wasn't.
Wow. You gave me a lot of things in a very short period of time. I love it. You were ready for them when they arrived to your house?
I guess I was. I wasn't ready for the way it would unfold. They marched me out in the front yard in handcuffs, but CNN was 25 feet from the front door. I couldn't understand how that was possible. I was arrested at 6:06 a.m. At 6:11, the same woman from CNN, Sarah Murray, texted my attorney, Grant Smith, a copy of my indictment. But my indictment was sealed until 9:30 that morning when a federal magistrate unsealed it. So her possession of it is illegal. And then if you looked at the metadata tags on the document, the initials of the man who wrote it, Andrew Weissman, the Mueller prosecutor, are present. Therefore, it's very clear that he is the source of that illegal leak. My lawyers brought this up with the judge. She could care less. But the idea that CNN was just there at on a hunch, or that it was on the basis of good investigative reporting, that's completely BS. I have an affidavit from a sworn statement from a Fort Lauderdale police officer who's now retired. He had been called in that day to back up the FBI. We lived on a cul-de-sac. The street was roped off at the end. It was a dead-end street. He was told no media, so he went up to the CNN camera crew and said, "You're going to have to leave." And then he got chewed out by a senior FBI agent who said, "No, they have special permission to be here." When the rest of the media was, half a block away, kept behind ropes.
That's strange. Very strange. So CNN there?
Yes, how coincidental.
Yes, how coincidental. And I do remember I was working in CNN Espanol back then in 2016 when Trump started his campaign. And I do remember how everybody was saying, well, just Donald Trump is just a rich man that has nothing to do. And he says, now I want to be president. But the reality is that back in the 80s, you were telling him you need to run.
Yeah, I think I was probably among the earliest people that suggested he should be a candidate. The first person to tell him that he should run for president was actually former President Richard Nixon. Nixon and Trump met at Yankee Stadium in the owner George Steinbrenner's box. And I was working for Nixon on some scheduling matters and some other political chores at the time. And Donald Trump was also a client of mine. And Nixon said to me the next morning, "Well, I met your man Trump." I said, "What do you think?" He said, "I'm telling you, this guy's got it. If he ever gets into politics, he could go all the way." And then he subsequently wrote a very nice handwritten note to Trump telling him exactly that, which the New York Times has actually published. So I think he was the first person who saw Trump as a potential president. In 1988, I was sitting in his office one day and he was reading the newspapers and he said, "George Bush and Michael Dukakis, we can't do better than that. There's nobody out there better than that." I said, "No, there definitely is." He said, "Well, who is it? We should get behind them." I said, "Well, I was thinking about you." And he said, "You're out of your mind." I said, "No, not really. You have very strong opinions about the country. You're a billionaire. You could finance your own campaign. Therefore, you would be beholden to no one. You could say whatever you want. You have strong positions on NATO, on trade, on national defense. You're constantly complaining about the poor leadership of the country. I think you should consider it." So what he would agree to was kind of testing the waters. He was very close friends with the late Ross Perot, the billionaire who ran for president twice as an independent. He was also good friends at the time with Jesse Ventura, because Jesse had wrestled at the Trump properties in Atlantic City, and Jesse had gone on to become governor of Minnesota. So both Perot and Ventura were strongly urging Trump to consider an independent, or actually a Reform Party, candidacy for president. In 2000, we would actually do that. In 1988, he stuck his toe in the water. He got extraordinary press, but he decided that he probably could not dislodge Vice President George Bush. 4 years later, he took another serious look at it because Perot and Ventura were urging him to do it. The media made light of all this. "He'll never run for president," they said. "It's all a publicity stunt. It's all just to burnish the Trump brand." But in truth, he did look at it seriously both times. But his caveat was always the same. "Raj, I'm not going to run unless I'm convinced I have a chance to win. Not a guarantee, but a chance. And in 2000, he came to the conclusion that had he run, he and whoever the Republican nominee was would split the more Republican vote and simply elect Al Gore. And that was something he couldn't live with. So he correctly decided that you had to be either a Republican or a Democrat to run for president. He used to needle me constantly saying, maybe I'll just become a Democrat. He just said it to upset me. But he had always been a registered Republican. He briefly changed his registration to the New York Independence Party so that he would be eligible to run for the Reform Party nomination. Then he elected not to do it. He did not run in 2000, but here's the interesting thing. It was too late to get his name off the ballot in the Reform Party primaries in Oregon and California, and therefore a month after he withdrew as a candidate, said he absolutely was not going to run, he won both party primaries.
Wow. It's a pretty powerful guy. And, you know, finally he did it in 2016.
I think it was one of those unique times where the times and the man were exactly right. So he was the right man at the right time, given the country's problems. And he became president at great sacrifice to himself. I mean, I think his net worth has been cut in half. I mean, he's still a billionaire, but he's not as wealthy as he was. And he's had to suffer the outrageous attacks on him and his family, the vituperation, the hatred, the vile hatred. He's the toughest person I know. I mean, look, I worked for President Richard Nixon. I worked for Senator Bob Dole. Both very tough guys. Donald Trump is tougher than either one of them.
Yeah, and he is a very confident man. I want to go back a little bit to the raid night.
Yes.
And I would like for you to tell me how do you feel knowing that you went through the same than President Trump's in Mar-a-Lago just recently?
Well, the day of the raid, immediately after I was arrested, the first thing they say is, "Who else is in the house?" I said, "Well, my wife is in the upstairs bedroom." And they said, "There's nobody else in the house." I said, "No." "What about your son, Scott?" I said, "My son, Scott, is not here." "Is there a gun in the house?" "There are no guns in the house." So they were taking me out the front door while they were going up the stairs. And then it occurred to me, since she didn't have her hearing aids in, she had not heard any of this. She was still sleeping. And I was afraid, in my mind, I had this idea that they would give her an order, but she wouldn't hear it, and that they would shoot her. That was really my concern. So I yelled, "She's hard of hearing," as I was being led out of the front door. Mm-hmm. She woke up essentially looking down the barrel of a couple of rifles. She didn't know if it was a home invasion. She saw the lights. She didn't know if there had been a car accident. She really didn't know. I think she was disoriented at the beginning, but my immediate concern was for her. And then they made us stand out in the street. They brought her out of the house, barefoot and in her night clothes.
Freezing.
They
One
made
of those rare Florida nights.
they made us stand in the middle of the street so that CNN could get really humiliating shots of us, although we weren't allowed to talk to each other. They'd taken both of our cell phones. And then after they left me, they have to take me to the booking center in Miramar to be fingerprinted and mugshot. She was there for 13 hours while they tore through our house. And they left the place a shambles, meaning they searched every square inch of the house. Take a drawer out, dump it on the floor, sort everything out, leave it there. Go through the bookcases, pull out every book, flip through the books, throw it on the floor. If there was a picture hanging on the wall, like the picture of my mother, punch out the picture to make sure nothing was hidden behind the frame. They took all of my electronic equipment, my PC, my laptop, my cell phone. When they returned my computer, somebody had worked it over with a sledgehammer. It no longer worked. They smashed the screen. So, and then they went through all of her clothes. They went through all of her personal effects. They went through her underwear drawer. And I now know definitively that the same counterintelligence team that was involved in the raid at my home is the same exact counterintelligence team that was involved in the raid at Mar-a-Lago, and we understand that the FBI agent who went through Melania Trump's closet and her personal effects is the same man who went through my wife's closet and her personal effects.
That's horrendous, and what a coincidence, I should ask, ironically.
Well, I can tell you this about the raid on our house. It provided no evidence whatsoever used in trial against me. The prosecutors argued that my case was related to the case of Russian hackers who they had charged with hacking the DNC, a case in which there's never been discovery, a case in which Mueller's never been able to put up his case because he doesn't have one. And they claimed that they would, in my trial, they would produce evidence gleaned from search warrants in that case, which they never did, but they used that to justify that my case needed to be given to Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who had the Russian hacker case. They were not related cases. They had no relationship at all. It was judge shopping that I ended up with the same judge as Paul Manafort.
Now that you went through all that horrible experience and that you know that the same people that went through your personal things and your wife's personal things, and the same as President Trump, how do you think this is going to work? Do you think that President Trump is going to go to the same court where they treat your case, where they work on your case? Do you think he has some chances?
Well, first of all, we don't know that he's going to be charged, although I would bet that given their desperation not to run against him as a presidential candidate, that they're seeking some way to disqualify him. It is either something related to January 6th, where I believe he's done nothing wrong, or something related to the retention of these documents, of which we know so little. It would be a reasonable question if he were charged regarding the documents, whether that matter would go to trial in South Florida, or whether that matter would go to trial in D.C. If it goes to trial in D.C., there is zero chance that he could be acquitted. We saw this in my trial. The judge was openly biased against me. She ruled for the government in every pretrial motion. I was prohibited from proving that there was no Russian hacking. I could have used forensic evidence and expert testimony to debunk that whole idea, the underlying premise of my indictment, denied. I was not allowed to use evidence of misconduct by the special counsel's office, the FBI, the Department of Justice, or any member of Congress, unconstitutional. The legitimacy of an investigation and an indictment is always grounds for defense. Kyles v. Whitley. The jury makeup was made up of 12 Trump haters, no military veterans, no Roman Catholics, no African American men, no Republicans, no conservatives, no independents even. So it was, and the jury forewoman had been a Democratic candidate for Congress. She said under oath during jury selection she'd never heard of my case, but she'd been tweeting about my case and posting on Facebook about my case, attacking me in 2019, as well as attacking President Trump. She clearly had a bias, but she had those posts on a private setting during jury selection and during the trial, and she tried to quietly delete them afterwards, but the journalist Mike Cernovich caught her. That should have been grounds to overturn my conviction and get me a new trial, but the judge ruled that that was not evidence of bias. It just gives you an example between the prosecutors withholding evidence, as they're about to do here. In Trump's case, they want to redact the affidavit that justifies the raid. In my case, they redacted Mueller's final report in which he was forced to admit that he had no factual basis to prosecute me. So I am tremendously suspicious of any time the government wants to redact something claiming national security. It almost always turns out to be their redaction of things that show their misdeeds.
Yeah, their security, not necessarily the U.S. security, right?
Correct.
Do you think Donald Trump has a good chance to not being inhabilitated to participate in politics
Well,
in the next few years?
I don't think he needs to be rehabilitated. His strength in the Republican Party has really increased dramatically because of this raid. The Republican Party of the Bushes, the country club Republican Party, that party's over. We are the America First Party. And Donald Trump is dominant within that party. There is no challenger for the nomination who can come within 20 points of him. So if he chooses to be the nominee, he will be the nominee. Can he win a general election? Given the gas prices, given the food shortages, given the inflation, given the fact that we won't spend the money to seal our southern border, causing a fentanyl epidemic in the country, but we're shipping $40 billion, and that's just a down payment, to Ukraine. No, I think the American people are ready for a dramatic change. Joe Biden promised us normalcy. He promised us a return of civility. Yet his Justice Department says that parents who go to a school board meeting because they object to the curriculum being taught to their children are domestic terrorists.
Can you imagine that? We're domestic terrorists for defending our kids?
It's really it's extraordinary. So we have seen the weaponization of the Justice Department and the FBI to go against a political rival, Donald Trump, the most obvious 2024 candidate, as well as his supporters. This is how we have felt.
So how is getting old with a lady like her? With her charm, because you're very nice, very charmed. You are a professional, you are an immigrant, you are a hardworking woman, and you have support a man that has been involved in any kind of trouble that you can think of. How is it living right now together, sharing that?
It's better than ever.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, first of all, I've been very forthright about the fact that when you go through the kind of thing that I've been through, that we've been through, a witch hunt, a 2-year relentless effort to destroy you, in which the media plays a full role. There was a time that I hit rock bottom. There was a time that I was dejected, depressed, angry, scared, worried about where she would live, how she would support herself, because we burned through our savings, sold our home, sold my car, lost much of our insurance. We were pretty close to destitute. That's one of the things the government does, is they destroy you financially so that you will plead to something you didn't do. And it was at that time that I redeemed myself in the blood of Jesus Christ. I'd been born a Catholic, but I'd fallen away from the church. But I went back to church, returned to praying. I had a fateful meeting with Reverend Franklin Graham, which was interesting because as a young man, when I was working for Richard Nixon, I had met Billy Graham. And he told me in no uncertain terms, see, I was thinking politically, so I said, well, Reverend Graham, could you put in a good word for me with President Trump? Because my lawyers wouldn't let me speak to Trump, and Trump's lawyers wouldn't let him speak to me during the time I was charged. So I said, Reverend Graham, could you put in a good word for me with President Trump in terms of clemency? He said, well, I'll see what I can do, but let me give you a much better piece of advice. Turn your life over to Christ. He will deliver you from your persecutors. This is a Christ who believes in justice, but you have to confess your sins and get right with Christ. So I have done that, and I've been forthright about the fact that I've done that. Am I perfect? I'm very far from perfect. Am I a sinner? Absolutely. But it has given me an inner strength to see this through. And then particularly when my wife was diagnosed with aggressive stage 4 cancer, almost immediately beginning after the pardon, early the following year, that was a very stressful time. I couldn't bear the idea of living without her. My faith sustained us. I think my faith and her practice of Buddhism, which is a philosophy, not a religion, these things I think sustained us. And today, she is cancer-free. Her energy is returned, as you can see. And it's still every day's a struggle. I mean, I'm censored, I'm canceled, I'm not allowed, I'm banned for life on Instagram, I'm banned for life on Facebook, I'm banned for life on Twitter. I'm banned for life on TikTok, not that I care. But I'm an author, so it's very hard to sell my books if you have no access to the marketplace. And of course, you're not allowed to express yourself. So the media can write anything they want about you. I've become clickbait. So you put my name in a headline, regardless of how completely ridiculous the story is, it makes money for whoever does it. So I thank God every day for Nidia's recovery. And on those occasions, which still happen, in which I'm down or discouraged or just sick of the fight because it never ends, she's the one who lifts me up. She's the one who tells me never give up.
What do you have to say?
You can't give up. And that's one of the tenets of my Buddhist practice, is you never give up.
You never give up.
Never give up.
So we should not give up on America.
We absolutely cannot give up on America. Donald Trump turned out to be a truly great president, and I believe he will be a great president again. There's only one man who was president, then he was defeated, then he returned to become president again. That was Grover Cleveland. He was a New Yorker. Donald Trump is still quintessentially a New Yorker. I think he's the only one with the gumption and the courage and the strength to take on the entire deep state cabal that has sought to hamper his presidency and then destroy him and beat them. And I think he's going to do it. And I want to be around to help.
Are you guys good Americans? Do you consider yourself good Americans?
Yeah.
I certainly do.
You do?
I do.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Estas fueron las declaraciones exclusivas de Roger y Nidia Stone sobre la redada en su residencia y arresto y la acusación contra Roger Stone, que finalmente terminó con el perdón del presidente Donald Trump. Ese ha sido un especial exclusivo de Americano Media. Muy buenas noches. Hasta mañana.